Joe Hopkins here, and it's an interesting question. Do you understand? I'll tell you what I'm getting at. I decided to talk about this subject because, well, it's been coming up a lot in my life. It comes up a lot in my life, understanding something. And a lot of us deal with the same sort of thing, to understand something and then to communicate that understanding to others. It's a very difficult thing. Why would it be so difficult? Well, first, to understand something, right? What's so hard about that? Except it's harder than it seems. So many people think they understand something and don't. And what do I mean? Well, I've been through a lot in my life. I've done a lot of things. And what I've found is to understand something requires you to really break it apart. It's never as simple as it looks. And usually you have to participate in that thing. Something seems one way until you go to do it. And then all the things that are impossible to explain start to become apparent. And those things aren't impossible to explain, but people usually don't explain them. When you read about things or learn about things, a lot of times there's stuff that isn't explained because it's hard to explain until you go to do it. And then you start to see, oh, now it makes sense, right? Also, it can be difficult to have a frame of reference to understand something without having done it. And then once you go to do it, now you get it. Some experiences are just foreign enough to anything else you've done that you have to do it to get it. So understanding something, it can be very difficult, especially when it comes with people. Because in my life, a lot, I've had to understand people. Why are they doing what they're doing? What do people do? What are their motives? Why are they doing it, and how do you deal with it? These are hard things. In my day job, I'm a corrections officer, which means I deal with a lot of people. Inmates, co-workers, supervision, all the way up to wardens, administrators, and even government officials, and quite often officials and from other departments and from outside, right? A lot of different people with a lot of different issues. So dealing with people, how they act, their motives, it's something that's near and dear to my heart. And then there's, I help my wife, who's a professional writer, who writes about these things. God bless her. She does a wonderful job, because breaking down what people do and why they do it is not an easy thing. Not at all. And then to express it and explain it can be even harder. To understand something is difficult. To understand people is almost impossible. Because, I mean, really, people, why do we act the way we act? Well, we only have a limited number of emotions that we can use as outputs in our lives, right? But there are an infinite number of possible inputs. Everything is acting on us, and we can only react in X number of ways. You know, we're limited. We're human beings. We only have so many ways to express ourselves. God gave us X number of emotions and responses, and that's what we have. But there is an unlimited number of things that can act upon us. Infinite inputs, limited outputs, makes it almost impossible to break down why that person is doing what they're doing. They might not even really know themselves. Understanding something, understanding people, understanding situations, how to do things is a hard thing. And you really do, in anything, have to participate with that thing to understand it. But let's say you've done that. You understand it. You understand the situation. You understand the thing you're doing. You understand this particular subject, whatever it is. You have an understanding of something, right? Next is an even harder task than understanding, and that is communicating that understanding. How can I impart my understanding to you? That's a very hard thing to do. How do you impart an understanding to another person who hasn't done this thing or who is just beginning to do this thing? It helps if they actually are involved in it somehow, because then some things start to make sense. But quite often, like with my wife, who is a writer. She's imparting an understanding of something to people who have not participated in that thing. That's hard. That's really hard. How do I get you to understand it? I understand it now, but how do you understand it? You understand it, but how do you get that person over there to understand it? Very hard. Very difficult thing. And I'm sure a lot of people can relate. Whether or not this little rant is helpful, I think it might be for some people to really sit down and think about it. How do I understand something? And once I do, how do I make you understand it? That's a hard thing to do. And here's the third big hurdle in the whole understanding process, even if I understand it completely, which nobody completely understands anything. There's always something new to uncover. But let's say I mostly understand something. I have a pretty good grasp of it, right? Music, for instance. I have a pretty good grasp of music. There's always new things to learn, but I've gotten a pretty good idea. There are people who have that. I wouldn't say I'm one of them. I'm pretty good with music, but as far as the understanding, you have guys that really, they brainiacs with it. They know this music theory thing. How do I explain it to you? And once it's explained to you, here's the third hurdle. How do I get you to believe me? How do I get you to accept the information? With a lot of things in life, the person you're explaining it to already has preconceived notions about it. They think they know something. So even if I understand it and I explain it adequately so that any reasonable person would also understand it, how do I get you to believe me that I'm telling the truth, that somehow what you know isn't true and what I know is, right? You would think after almost 2.5 decades working in prisons, people would take my word for it when I tell them how it is. People have asked me about my job. People are curious, and I try to explain. And that's something I've given up trying to do over the years because everybody's seen a TV show or a movie or some expose on the news about prisons, and they think they know something, and you can't convince them they don't. You can't convince them that TV is just TV. That movie is just a movie. And the expose they saw on 2020 was some reporter doing a very skimming of the top of the whole thing, not going very deep and just taking a mild look at it. Like, that's not what it is, bud. Not even close. And I know even some of you, when I mention this, ooh, prisons, you think you think you know something. You don't. My job is entirely weirder than you could possibly imagine and not in the ways you think. But how do I get you to understand that? And that's a difficult thing. Everybody thinks they know about certain things, and they don't. They just don't. Even the people involved sometimes, they're participating. I've worked with them for years, and they still don't get certain things. And even then, they can't understand how it looks from the other side. How does it look from the inmate's side? The inmates don't get how does it look from our end, from the officers? People don't get these things. The administrators don't get how it looks from the guy that's just working a tier. And the guy working the tier doesn't get how it looks from the administrator's side. Everybody's got their own point of view, and nobody's getting the whole picture. And how do you get somebody to believe you? I understand. I get what's going on. I see it, but even if I can explain it to you, how do I get you to believe me? This is where comedians come in very handy. A lot of times comedians, the best comedians, are the ones who are good at seeing something, understanding it, and expressing it in an amusing way that makes sense so that people are more likely to accept it if it makes them laugh. For some reason, if it makes you laugh, you're more likely to accept what I'm saying is at least partially true. God bless comedians. I wish I was a funnier person. If I could be more funny, maybe people would believe me more. Instead, I've mostly just stopped trying to explain things, you know? But that's not really an answer. You can't stop explaining things, especially me. I go to work. I'm in a position of authority. I'm unfortunately in a position under authority. I'm in authority over these people and under those people. So I have to be able to make decisions and explain them adequately so that these people will do it and those people will understand what I did. And that's dicey. And usually you have to make those decisions on the spot with very little time and do it firmly. Because if you don't seem confident, people won't believe you. Confidence goes a long way to being believed. But yeah, so everybody runs into this problem. I'm sure you guys have run into this problem. Any of you have had a situation where you need to understand something and then you need to explain that thing and get the person you're explaining it to not only also understand it, but believe that what you're telling them is accurate. That's a very difficult thing to do, but it's something we do all the time in life. So I guess what I'm asking you guys, and trust me, I'm going out on a limb in this because I don't think this video will do very well. Not a lot of people are going to watch it or appreciate it. But for those of you who do, how do you think a person should deal with this? How do you understand something and then impart that understanding to others? It's a difficult thing. I see people trying to all the time. I see other YouTubers. Every guitar YouTuber, every music YouTuber has a lesson plan. I don't. I'm a terrible teacher. But most of them have lessons that you can take to learn music theory or learn to play guitar or whatever. They're trying to impart an understanding. And that's a difficult thing to do. God bless teachers. Anybody gifted with it, God bless you. But they run into it all the time because even the students that are taking their courses and paying attention and learning it sometimes have their own ideas that aren't exactly accurate. How do you get them to understand and then also accept? And those are the three things. You have to understand, you have to explain that understanding, and they have to accept it. And how do you do that? How in the world does any of this work? Just a thought for you guys. It's something that's been banging around in my head, mostly because, once again, my wife, who writes about this stuff, has to know. I'm her sounding board. She has to know, why are people doing what they're doing? What's the motives behind it? She needs to understand. And then she needs, as a writer, to express that understanding. And then it's hopeful that some people will actually get it and accept it. And that's hard. That is such a hard thing to do. So the question is, do you understand? And if you do, can you tell anybody that you understand? Can you make them understand? I'm not sure if I understand. I've now confused myself to such a degree that I don't understand. Honestly, I spend most of my time trying to figure it out and drowning in this sea of nonsense. And it's difficult. I'm a little tired of it, but it'll drive you to drink, man. So there you go. My thoughts for the day. Leave a comment. Tell me, do you understand? And can you help me understand? And subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you in the next video. I love you guys. Peace out, baby. Bye-bye.